Welcome back to this technically part 2 video, although you don't necessarily need to watch part 1 for this to make sense. But in this video, we're talking with Sebastian from Red Frame Tech and Emily from Micro Four Nerds about Panasonic Lumix, videography, photography, whatever, going into the future, whereas in part 1 we talked about a 2023 retrospective on how Lumix is doing. So we talk a bit about the retrospective with these guys as well, but we kind of breeze over it compared to the last episode. So you don't have to watch it now, but you can watch it afterwards or not at all. Do what you gotta do. So guys, sit down, relax, and enjoy this episode of Micro Four Talks. Let's bring our guest in here. We've got Emily with Micro Four Nerds. We've got Sebastian with Red Frame Tech. How about you go first, Emily, and just introduce yourself, your YouTube channel, and I guess what you do outside of YouTube really quickly.
Yeah, I'm Emily Lowry. My YouTube channel is Micro Four Nerds. Love a good pun. My passion is photography and tinier cameras, but I do shoot full frame Lumix as well for weddings and different client works. Mostly at the moment, I'm a full-time YouTuber with a little bit of client work on the side.
I'm Sebastian from the Netherlands, and I run the channel Red Frame Tech, which I started around my Lumix G9, but evolved into a channel all about video, audio related stuff, reviews and tutorials. And I'm a videographer, and I mainly do weddings, corporate work, some documentary work. And I love everything video and audio, and Lumix cameras, obviously.
Not so much on the photo side, right? Or do you do just photos for like personal stuff?
The occasional personal photo, yeah.
Right on. So I feel like Emily might be the most accomplished photographer among us. I might be somewhere in the middle. So you've got the whole spectrum here. Quickly, let's review 2023 before we get into the future, because I feel like what happened last year is going to color what we think of the next year going forward. So I guess, what do you guys think about the direction Lumix is taking as a company as a whole? Like, what did 2023 say about what they're going for to you guys?
Well, I think the first thing is that they've shown that Micro Four Thirds isn't going anywhere. I mean, yeah, they've made a statement with the G9 Mark II that it's alive and kicking, and I think that's great. I do think that it's Panasonic doesn't release as many cameras as other brands like Sony, for example. I mean, that lineup is just confusing. There are so many. And I think Panasonic does a good job at keeping it straightforward. It's very clear what you can pick and what it's for. Although I do have a point to make about the G9 Mark II. Maybe we could talk about that later. They just come out with a camera that's actually ready and fully featured. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with the G9 Mark II, particularly for my little corner of the internet. Any new camera in Micro Four Thirds is a celebration. And I had a list of what I wanted in sort of a dream camera, and it more or less ticked every box. There's just a couple of things that I would change. Primarily, I would love a smaller version, perhaps with some fewer video features, but a more compact thing. So I do think Micro Four Thirds shines when the cameras are a little bit smaller. But otherwise, I've just had an absolute blast with the G9 Mark II in 2023.
Yeah, I'm glad Micro Four Thirds is still getting the love, and it's I do love the rapid shifting back and forth between it's dead, it's alive, it's thriving. No one can really make up their mind, but I mean, that's just how I think engagement works online, and that's a way to get people to see some problems and also see what might be good about it. So yeah, I've been impressed with what they've been releasing, and I do agree that every release feels super impactful, which is nice. I don't know any difference between any of the A60 6000 series, I think it is. There's got to be like 8 of those things, and I'm just like, I don't know if I could tell you what the differences are. But yeah, I guess before we move on to 2024, the last question is what release strategy did you guys think was more successful, or they should take note on more, the S5 II and S5 IIX release or the G9 II release? Like, what was smoother? What was more impactful? What made a bigger difference for the company, do you guys think?
Oh, I was at I was lucky enough to be at the launch in Japan for the S5 II and London for the X and Kent for the G9 Mark II. So I think the budget is massively geared towards the full frame releases. I think there was a lot of buzz and a lot of hype, and I do think it was massively more successful. But I do think at the same time, Micro Four Thirds enthusiasts, you don't need such a fanfare because we're existing customers with existing lenses. Whereas I think with the L mount system, you really need to make people adopt into the system. So they needed to have that impact. And I think it was super successful. Definitely the S5 Mark II was such an exciting time to be online.
For sure. And I do appreciate more transparency of like, here's the S5 II and the S5 IIX, which is coming later, but you can make your decision now instead of being like blindsided by a better camera coming around the corner. What about you, Sebastian? What release did you feel was more effective, or were they, I guess, just different?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Emily that the S5 II and the S5 IIX were more hyped. And it does make sense with a new, relatively new mount. Plus, full frame is being hyped online anyway. So it makes sense for them from a marketing perspective to hop on that same train and hype that. But so yeah, the G9 Mark II release was definitely less big or impactful. But I do think they made a good move with it. But I do think they made a little mistake in the marketing, because they marketed as a photography first camera. And while I've seen online, mostly on your channel, Emily, that it's great at that, like at photography. But I mean, it's got basically every feature that the GH6 has as well, video features. Apart from some hardware differences like the screen and the extra record button and the timecode port, the rest is basically the same. So I think the G9 Mark II would have done better even in terms of impactful release if they would have marketed the camera more as a true hybrid.
Yeah, I think, there are those occasional strange marketing decisions with Panasonic where it's just like, I always think of the G100 being like, this is so good for so many things, but not really for what it was marketed for. So, it's one of those things where, and I think Lumix is really good about getting feedback from creators and people that are actually going to use these cameras. And I think sometimes, I think maybe it was just too hyper specific on the photographer. Awesome. Well, that was like the main releases for 2023. I guess we'll talk about what we think Lumix might do in 2024 first, and then we'll get down to some like wish list things you guys might want to see.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for them to come out with a new GH, whether that's a GH7 or GH6 Mark II. Because, I mean, it makes sense that they want to put the face detect autofocus in all their cameras from now on and refresh them as quickly as possible. Whether that's going to be this year, I'm not sure. It's a bit soon, really.
Yeah, I think that's my impression as well. I think the GH6 is still relatively new, and as we've said before, like Lumix don't saturate the market with 100 new cameras, so I do think the GH7 is probably a little bit of a way off. I'm really hoping that they refresh the G100, to be honest. You know, I think that the world is dying for a smaller vlog camera with decent photos, decent videos that isn't as big as the footprint of the S5 and the G9 Mark II. How far off that is, I have no idea, but I'm hoping we'll see something this year for sure.
Yeah, the G100 is interesting in from the original then. From a marketing perspective, being as it was like released as a vlogging camera with no IBIS.
And only 10 minutes 4K?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense.
So silly.
It would be great if they would like refresh that one with actual IBIS, so you can actually use it as a vlogging camera. Yeah, I think that would be great.
Do we think that a G100 would be like literally just the same camera with a phase detect sensor, or do you think they would take like an S5 II approach to it where it would be slightly bigger, maybe like a tiny little, even maybe a little bit worse IBIS than you'd see in some of the bigger cameras, and phase detect, or do you think it'd be more of a big redesign, I guess, like the G9 II, or like just a slightly bigger version like the S5 II? Or I guess what would you guys want to see in a G100? Obviously size is still important, but how far can we push that to get some extra features?
I'm really hoping if it does need to be bigger, it needs to be bigger. But I think if they do bring out a G100 without IBIS, it'll get laughed off the platform. Like, it needs to have all the features that we would need as content creators. And I think, you know, like the GX8 has IBIS in it, so it doesn't need to be huge. It can still be relatively pocketable and still have all the features in that we need. So I do think it would probably need to be quite a big redesign, to be honest.
Yeah, I think for a new G100 to do well, it needs to be small. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to get it. You get a G9 Mark II instead. But yeah, IBIS, that should be in there.
You know, I had another thought about a small camera redux that it has pros and negatives to the G100, and that would be like a G7 successor, because people are still selling like the G7 and like Best Buys and stuff. Like, it's still out there, and I still see people posting pretty regularly about, should I buy this camera today, all this stuff. And I could see it kind of going both ways, but I just remembered that camera the other day, so I was like, oh, there might be something there.
That was my first Lumix camera, and I bought it for £200 ex display, and it absolutely blew my tiny mind. I could not believe what you could get out of that camera for the price, and I think they go for more than what I got it for now. It's crazy.
Yeah, they're like 300, 350 now. Like, I was talking to the guy, and he's like, I on these comments, and he was like, I'm like, I think the GH4 is not that much more. He's like, it's actually less than the G7 now. I'm like, what? Like, it's just held on to its value for what. I've never used one, so I don't know, but it's a pretty small camera as well, right?
Yeah, very small, no IBIS, and about as plastic fantastic as the G100, but it works. It does the job. Even up until a few years ago, I was using that as like a C-cam for my wedding ceremonies, actually.
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe we see the triumphant return of the G7 as just like that super entry-level camera with phase detect, because I feel like, yeah, there's obviously no phase detect. I don't think there's any Lumix phase detect cameras that you consider entry-level. They're all sort of mid-level or mid-low level compared to other companies. So yeah, we'll see if they do it. I think everybody would love to see it, but you know, they've got the numbers, so I guess they'll see if it's worth it, and if it is, they'll do it. So
I do think though that like the market for smaller, more affordable cameras is shrinking because of phones. So yeah, I think that might be a consideration for Panasonic not to bring out a small pocketable camera. Would be a shame, but I would understand.
And Emily, did I see part of one of your videos or a comment of yours talking about maybe a vintage style camera for Lumix, or am I making that up?
No, this is what I'm pioneering for. I think there is a massive market for a good looking camera. And Lumix, let's be honest, they're not great at this. they're not great. But you know, like an Olympus Pen F, you know, with tactile buttons and metal build quality, like a vintage throwback. I think street photographers, content creators, there's a huge market for pretty cameras, I think, that Lumix have always slept on. And I'd love to see them with real-time LUT as well, to sort of go after the Fujifilm market with their recipes, because I think real-time LUT's a much better idea. I just don't think Lumix have explained it very well to the customers. But yeah, I think there's a huge market for it, and I would be the first person to buy something like that.
If they make something like that small, then yeah, I do think as well there's a market. Yeah.
I'd love to see Lumix put out some, like, they should probably just bake in some more live LUTs by default into some of these cameras, you know, just make up some generic recipes or some like little like Kodak Vision 3, whatever, which I think you could just do, maybe, I don't know. I think they should have a few more built in, because I think just getting them on the camera is going to put some people off. And once they see how great they are, like, put the nicest LUT on there from the very cam pack, put some film stocks on there. Because I don't think they come with any on the camera by default. Am I right about that?
Maybe the Rec 709 conversion, but I don't think anything else. Nothing creative, definitely.
Yeah, and they always have had those creative filters that are kind of like more silly, but some more usable ones would be pretty nice. But yeah, I do find at a certain level of like casual consumer, it really, like, you pull out a camera, people are like, that looks so cool. And that's like the first impression you get from people around you. And I definitely think there is something to be said about having, like, I don't think every camera should be like the most like beautiful piece of art ever. But having one of those, I think would help. But again, we'll see if they go that direction. Like, I loved the controls. If you guys ever used the LX100 or LX100 Mark II, like, that might be the closest they got to like a really like,
pretty. It was nice, yeah.
Vintage kind of camera. So yeah, we'll see. I'd love to see that too, though. Do you think that would be? You think Micro Four Thirds or full frame would want a vintage style camera more?
I think Micro Four Thirds. I think you've got such a selection of third-party lenses that also look quite vintage, and I think having smaller form factor on the lenses would be great. I mean, if it was a full frame, you know, the body would look lovely, but then you'd stick the 1.8 primes on it and it just wouldn't look right.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would look halfway decent would be those Sigma art lenses with the f2s. And those are still not super small, but those would look kind of the part with the aperture ring and stuff. So you could get away with it. But again, I always see full frame as sort of like the workman, like, just get it done type of cameras. And Micro Four Thirds has always had a little bit more range and flexibility to me. So I think that does make sense, especially with stuff like the Pen F, like being inspired from like the film days, you know, with the old pen. I actually have a film Pen F back on the shelf somewhere. I have to show it to you guys sometime, but cool. So we talked about what we might see Micro Four Thirds wise. What do you think, again, this year, next year, whatever, what do you think the direction is for full frame? You know, do we see a new S1H? Do we see a new S1R? Do we see just a new S1 successor? Or it's just something totally different? What are you guys feeling like is the next steps for the full frame line of cameras?
So I do think they will come out with a S1H successor with, just a fully featured video camera, basically, with time code and, more like the G86 in the full frame line, just like it is now, basically, with the S1H. And then, a more photography-focused S1 successor, S2 or S2, S1 Mark II, I don't know what the name is going to be. But I do think they have to be clear about the marketing.
I was going to say, I think the marketing of the G9 Mark II was quite deliberate. Even though it does have a lot of amazing video features, I think if they came out singing the video side, everyone would be enraged thinking it's a GH replacement, where it does need to have that divide. You know, I think I see it as like it's got the video features as a nice bonus rather than it being anything to combat sort of a future GH7. But yeah, I do get what you mean. The biggest thing about the G9 Mark II for me is it doesn't have a thermal management, and that does stress me out a little bit for video.
Although I've seen Shane from Geeky Nerdy Techie, who has been on the channel before as well, he really has only got it to overheat in 4K 120 and for a longer periods of time. So he really sings it as like, this is like another GH5 with the passive cooling that just happens naturally, being enough for like 95% of people 95% of the time. But still, it's like that what if stress,
I got it to overheat in 22 minutes. It was the hottest day of the year in England. It was in August, and I got it to overheat pretty quickly 3 times in a row. It was 0.4 firmware, so I don't know if that'll make any difference, but my thermal management tests seem well shorter than everybody else's. I don't know if I was just extra cruel sticking it in direct sunlight on the hottest day of the year. But then again, I could have a wedding on the hottest day of the year, and they always tend to be at midday, which is really annoying. So it really did sway me away from that as a video-centric camera. Just my experience. I know other people have tested it differently.
Interesting. And then is there like a low and a high setting in that camera, or
for thermal management?
Okay.
Yeah. You can override it, and it gives you a little bit of a warning, but you can override it. But I did the exact same test with the S5 II and the GH6, and obviously both of them just kept going indefinitely until the batteries died. Whereas the G9 Mark II overheated 3 times in the space of those going. But yeah.
Something interesting that I have never tested. I've been meaning to test it at some point. Is that like heat can cause like degradation of image quality, and that might be a reason not to use the G9 Mark II for video, because it might degrade the image quality when it gets hot. But yeah, I'm going to test that hopefully soon.
Yeah, the only real world test I did film for about 45 minutes straight in Kenya, but I was in the shade, but it was blooming hot. So I do think with it being black, baking in the sun made the bigger difference. But yeah, still, give me a GH7 when it comes out, please.
Yeah, I'll never forgive photographers for telling Panasonic allegedly not to put a fan in the G9 II, because that's apparently where the idea came from. It was like, all right, photographers don't want it. I'm like,
oh, I see. What they said to me was the new IBIS system is hench. It took up all the space. It's new hardware, so there's no space for the thermal management inside that chassis.
I have heard that too, now that you say it. So I wonder, I'm sure they're both true on some level for sure. So
yeah,
I know Panasonic does send out those little questionnaires, of like, what's important to you in this camera? I know I got one about my S5 and I answered a bunch of questions. And so maybe it was something like photographers were like, we don't want a fan to compromise weather sealing. And then they're like, well, we may as well do something with all this space. So yeah, that's probably what it was. Awesome. So any other wish list Micro Four Thirds stuff? I guess maybe the only thing left is maybe okay, well, let's talk about Olympus for a second. Do you guys have any sense of what Olympus is up to, what you think they should be doing? I know you've talked about this a little bit, Emily, in some of your videos. I think maybe it was the OM5 video. You talked a little bit about the direction maybe they should take and some advice for them. But if you've thought about that anymore, or use their cameras anymore, I guess what would you want to see from Olympus? And Sebastian, you can jump in afterwards if you have anything to say. Maybe not, because half the people I talk to aren't even sure Olympus is still around. So it's rough out here.
So the biggest thing I want from OM system, and I don't think we'll ever see it, is a refreshed Pen F, a Pen F Mark II. I think with weather sealing, with the new menu system, like the menu system in the OM1 is so much better than in any other Olympus or OM system camera I've ever used. And it's not in the OM5, which is very silly. So they need to update that camera. But yeah, I don't know. I think they're quite stylish. I think they've got a lot of great features and a lot of computational features that other brands just don't have. But I want to see a Pen F Mark II. And I'm excited to see how the OM1 line develops as well, because even though that's slightly older than the G9 Mark II, it gives it a run for its money. It really blooming does. It's fantastic.
I know people love their lenses, especially too. I know a lot of people shoot on the G9 II or the GH6 and have all Olympus lenses just because they like it better. So I think there's a lot of potential as a company and things for them to do, but it always just seems like there's one or two things just not quite there, you know. And just like anything, once you have the OM1 and then you go to like an OM5 and the menus are still the old menus, it's kind of tough going back, you know. Like it's like me going back to like a GH4. It's like these menus used to be so good, but I'm kind of spoiled by the new cameras now. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they do, and I think they've always kind of pushed the industry forward and had some extra competition for Micro Four Thirds, which I think is good, but you're definitely in like a bit of a transitional phase, hopefully right now. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to ever speak to me again. Even though I love them, they don't love me anymore because I said that the G9 Mark II was nice.
See, that's the thing though, is like, I think you have so much to say about those cameras because you see the potential and you really like them. You know, it's like when you're critical of something like a TV show you used to like or a sequel to a movie you loved, it's like it's because you want the best for it. It's not because there's any ill will there, because I think it's pretty clear to me that you still enjoyed both the cameras that you used, but there's just things that would have been, in our perspective at least, easy to address and it would have gone a long way. So it is what it is, I guess. And not to speak for you, but that's like the impression I got from your videos.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much great stuff about the OM1, but they'll never catch up to the video side of Lumix because Lumix have been the pioneers of that for years and years and years. So I think bang for buck, it's obvious that the G9 Mark II is a better option because it does all of the photography, the burst modes, the subject recognition, and the video too. So it's a no-brainer to me, but apparently that annoyed a few people.
No. I will say Olympus still, I think, makes like by far the most rugged cameras you can buy. So if you are in the most extreme conditions ever, I think the Olympus OM1 might be like the toughest camera ever made. Like they actually have like official IPX ratings, which I don't think anybody but like action cameras does besides them. So onto some of the full frame wish lists. Like what are some things you guys like to see? We talked about specific cameras, but maybe there's lenses that are still missing in the lineup. Maybe you want to see more third-party stuff. What do you think can be done in that category for the like S series lineup?
I think there's something I want to see where that goes, like in general, both full frame and Micro Four Thirds, and that's the audio side of things. All the new cameras now have like 4-channel audio, but they're not pushing the XLR1 adapter particularly. And they also haven't refreshed it or come out with something new, something different. So I'm very curious to see like if they're going to do something about that, like come out with a new adapter or maybe a camera with, I don't know, 2 3.5mm ports. So you can use the 4 channels. I'm not sure why they've put that in the cameras as a standard that you can't turn off either. I'm not really bothered by it because you can remove it with one click of a button really in post. But I'm curious about that.
I feel like there is a lot of potential there as well, just because you do see companies like Sony doing a little bit more with that. They have a very similar XLR adapter, I believe, but I think they also have like just a shotgun mount that just connects straight to the hot shoe with no other cables or power or anything like that. Or you see some stuff like of these really powerful wireless monitor system or wireless microphone systems that are coming out recently, where it's like, oh, it's just a little case. There's 2 included microphones. So I feel like if Panasonic had like a tiny little XLR adapter that just automatically connected to 2 Panasonic microphones on those 2 channels, and then you could put in a shotgun mic on the 3.5, there's definitely like some, and maybe they can partner with someone for that, because, you know, they did the whole thing with Condor Blue, I believe, and that handle that came out recently, and that was a big partnership and collaboration. So I would definitely love to see Panasonic in general, I guess, just work with other companies to do stuff like that.
The one thing that I've always wanted is just to have like a scratch track. You know, you've got 4 channels coming in and they're all exactly the same. If they could just make it that one was like 6 dB less, so that you could avoid P chain.
Safety track.
Yeah, a safety track, so that it you know, there's some function to it, even if you don't have the XLR adapter. Because my thing in Final Cut is you have to like mute the other 3 every single time on every single channel. It does my head in.
Well, that's actually a very good idea. If they could implement like track 3 and 4 as safety tracks, that would be great.
I think it'd be everyone would love that, you know. Yeah, I certainly would. Particularly, you know, if someone's doing a wedding speech and they start off very, very nervous and then someone booms with laughter. It's a nightmare unless you've got 32-bit float. So doing that with a safety track would be so cool.
Yeah, those are both really good ideas. I let Panasonic just do all of them, and then we'll pick which one we want to use. Okay, I'm sure that'll be good.
They can consult us if they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This one's free, but the next one we'll have to charge, unfortunately. Exactly. So, yeah, I think that I'd be really excited to see that for sure. And yeah, if they do release an S1H successor, some kind of additional audio setup and things like that, I think multiple ports is going to be more common in the future. You know, I think I've talked about like having 2 USB-Cs, for example, to have power delivery, or connected to a gimbal and go to a SSD at the same time.
Yeah, I mentioned that in my. Sorry.
Oh yeah, maybe that was your idea. I'm just claiming this. I'm like, I've heard this. I've talked about this. Maybe we just both had the same idea. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I talked about that in my GH6 long-term review, and I gave the example of the Nikon Z8 that has 2 USB-C ports, one for data and one for power delivery, which I think should be the standard going forward.
That would be awesome. Because, you think if you're recording to SSD, you tend to be filming for longer periods of time, and then you can't power the device. Yeah, that's a great idea. We should just make the next camera. We should. Yeah, we should. We definitely should.
Maybe that'll be the next episode of the podcast, just making the next camera for Panasonic and handing it to them. So, I did not know the Z8 was the inspiration for that idea. I didn't know they had that, even though I've watched that video of yours. So who knows? But yeah, I think, man, we're onto something here, I think. So awesome.
It was a very long video, so I get it if you missed things.
I love long videos, though. The longer, the better for me. So there's a few things that have been announced. I'm gonna have to put these earlier in the video. There's 2 pieces of news or rumors or whatever that I thought were interesting. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on. The first is the smaller of the 2, which is there's like a travel super zoom type lens on the L mount lineup. It looks to me maybe like a 28 to something, 28 to 180, 28 to 200. I think that's a kind of an interesting lens, but I'm not sure how much professional use you could get out of it. What do you guys think about? I think it's a good introduction for sure, but I guess what do you guys think of that lens, and what do you think might be on the horizon for the L mount, or maybe needed in the L mount going forward?
On the L mount alliance, I just think it's a really good idea to start taking out people's objections. Even if it's not going to be the biggest selling lens in the world, having something available to people makes the system as a whole look more attractive. And I think, because I'm quite used to shooting Micro Four Thirds, I don't mind a narrower f-stop when I shoot full frame. I think that might be a fun travel lens for me personally, but maybe not for professional stuff, like you say.
Yeah, even then though, I think there's always a room in my kit for one super zoom. Like, especially if it's outside, I'll use the kit, or not kit, but the 14 to 140 lens on Micro Four Thirds. Not the best lens, but if you're in a wedding ceremony, you're like, this might be like need to be a wide angle. This might need to be a close up. And just having a 28 to 280 is such a stupidly big range that you could just do whatever.
So I think with the latest one, the 100mm 2.8 macro, where they've made it the smallest in the world, the least amount of focus breathing, I think it's important that, you know, there may be more to that rumor than you think. You know, that travel zoom might be the smallest. It might have extra things that they've been working on, because they are really innovative and really underrated, I think, when it comes to the lenses and the L-mount system.
No, for sure. I think in general, Lumix has pushed their lens design a little bit further than they even needed to. I think that's why so many of the Micro Four Thirds lenses perform so well with phase detect, even though they weren't originally built for that, is because they went a little further than they really needed to. Another piece of news that I heard recently that I was interested in, but I want to see what you guys think of, is I believe Panasonic's like professional AV like broadcasting department has been kind of folded in with the Lumix prosumer division, and it seems like they've always kind of worked together on some level, but since, you know, I'm a big fan of, like, in theory anyway, I've never used one, of like the VariCam. I thought the EVA 1 was interesting back in the day, and those were both things from like the more broadcast side of Lumix and Panasonic. So what do you guys think about that development and what might come of it? You know, are we going to see more box cameras? Are we going to finally see more like dedicated cinema cameras, like something from like Sony, like the FX line? What do you guys think? What potential do you guys see for Panasonic going forward with the broadcast department now kind of combined with Lumix?
I think it makes sense that they did it, because the gap between like consumer or prosumer cameras and higher end broadcast or cinema cameras, that gap is closing. So it makes sense that they like merge it together. And I think it will have benefits for the video features of for both the GH and the full frame, whatever it's going to be, S1H2 cameras. And yeah, the box cameras are interesting. I find them interesting, although I haven't ever used one, but they're very niche, obviously. It's more for like fixed setups or like conferences or whatever. But they're also interesting as an alternative to what you said, like an FX6 or an FX9, because you can rig them out to be a cinema camera. And I think we might see box cameras coming out, maybe not this year, maybe next year. But I think they're going to continue that line of cameras as well, the BGH1 and the BS1H at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, I'm surprised we never got a GH6 version of the box cameras personally. I always thought that was like going to be right around the corner. And I guess it's not been an excessive amount of time, but I thought that could be a very compelling camera for certain productions.
Yeah, in a way, the BS1H, what is it? The BGH1 is, well, it's more like a GH5S in the box camera style. I think a GH6 in box camera style wouldn't have been enough of an improvement over the BGH1.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on what you value. I'm not sure, but for me, they seem like a logical upgrade. Emily, what about you? Do you have any insights into, well, maybe not insights, but any reaction to that? Or I know that new piece of news, like I barely caught it. And I was like, I feel like this might be bigger than I think, but it might not also manifest in a big way either. So who knows? But yeah, what do you think?
So, because I've come from sort of photography first, my video skills are kind of lagging by a couple of years. So for my needs, sort of the GH6 was probably a little bit more than what I needed. But I do really like the idea of sort of rigging out a box camera and giving it a go. I'm really wrapping my head around what it offers over what we have access to now. Yeah, I think it could be quite interesting.
And would you ever be interested in like a dedicated cinema camera from Lumix? Like, so something in that FX3, FX30, like it's kind of reminiscent of a DSLR, but there's no EVF. There's just a small screen. That's one of the big downsides people don't like or really love about the box cameras, is there's no real way to view your footage out of the box. And so I don't know, do you guys, I guess we'll start with Emily for this, but is there a place for like a pseudo low end Sony Blackmagic-esque cinema camera from Lumix?
I think it would be interesting. I think a lot of people would be into it. But for me personally, I think the best thing that draws me to the system is having a hybrid camera and only having to bring one camera out that does both. And I think if I split the video off into a cinema-centric camera, my bag would get bigger and bigger and bigger, and everything would get a little bit more complicated. So for my needs, no, but I can see how there would be interest in it for sure.
Yeah, I can see how people might be interested in it. But for me personally, if I want to have a camera that's more like a cinema camera, I would rather have like an actual box camera. I don't personally fully understand the FX3, FX30 sort of design. They also just the other day got a shutter angle, which I think if you bring out a cinema line of cameras, it should at least have shutter angle, you know, and they just the other day came out with a firmware update to give it that. But yeah, better late than never, yeah. But yeah, apart from some extra mounting points, I don't really see the benefits. You still, like if you want to rig it up, it's still going to be very similar to rigging up a GH6. So yeah, I for me personally, I wouldn't be interested. I would be interested in an actual box camera then.
Yeah, just go all the way instead of this like half measure ground. For me, the biggest thing for cinema cameras is just the ports and things like that. Like I'd love like some real SDI and things like that for being on set and productions where like dealing with HDMI and focus pullers and sending like the signal to like a little director's monitor or whatever. With HDMI, it just gets so complicated, and there's a lot of really good infrastructure for like SDI. And then stuff like the XLR ports and things like that.
Exactly.
Those are things I'm missing, but can live without. So
XLR with good preamps, that would be, and like you said, SDI, that would be the benefit of having an actual cinema camera or box camera.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think if it benefits Panasonic, they should go for it. If they don't think it's going to, maybe not worth it. But I definitely agree with Emily that like every time I look at a cinema camera or from Sony, from whoever, whatever, I'm just like, oh yeah, it can't take photos, or it just takes like basically a screenshot of the video. I'm like, gosh, that makes me want to use it so much less. Cause you know, I mean, even doing like short films and things like that, it's just like, all right, time to take the cast photo, and everyone gets in front of the camera. And if I've got a Blackmagic, I'm just like, all right, here's my like weird, like flat DNG image that I don't know. It's just like, just that limitation, especially because I know it's kind of artificial, is like rubs me the wrong way for sure. But that's maybe just a me thing. Who knows? Do you think it's possible or would be beneficial for Lumix to introduce like a more introductory S-series camera? Because again, just like Micro Four Thirds, they sort of start and stop at the middle end right now. There's not a high end, there's not a low end. So we've talked about the high end and some cinema stuff. Is there a low end camera for the S-series that could work? And what do you guys think that might look like. I guess, Emily, we'll go to you first since you've got a little bit more experience with those cameras.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few Lumix enthusiasts about this idea, and I think the reason that a lot of people shoot Canon all these years later, and the reason that a lot of people stick with Sony, is some people's first cameras are the ones that they'll stick with for life, because you start investing in the lenses, and having a stripped down S5 as an entry level proposition would be so beneficial. So beneficial, because then once someone's in the system, they can work up as their skills grow.
Yeah, I could definitely see that work as well. Yeah, Sony has one, like a relatively affordable full frame, or was it? I'm a bit confused. Or is it the R8, Canon R8?
I think they both have them, but it really depends on how.
Yeah,
much...
like an entry level full frame. Yeah, I think that could work really well.
So, moving away from Lumix as a whole, I was curious if you guys are noticing any trends in just like the larger video and photography world. Let's start with video, I suppose. Are there any like trends or things like that, like social media, videography, anything like that, that you guys are seeing going forward that people should be paying attention to, or that you guys are leaning into or leaning away from, or anything along those lines? What does the video world look like, I guess, going into 2024 for you guys?
I think what I'm finding is that there is still a market for, actually maybe even a growing market for less fast-paced content. Over the last several years, we've seen so much incredibly fast-paced content, and I think that's slowly like plateauing, maybe. And the content that's a bit slower paced with like more depth, so to speak, I think is growing again. That market of content.
Yeah, I'm very glad about that as well. I think...
Me too.
Yeah, like, you know, retention. But at the end of the day, we want to actually make a connection with someone and tell our stories. And I think you do need to give those room to breathe a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And it really depends. Some things can be short and sweet and nice, but if you're trying to go in depth with something or tell a story or an experience that connects with people on a deeper level, I think matching that the content to the format, I think, is important too. Because if some things can be snappy and just a 30-second thing, but yeah, it's a trend I definitely hope continues as well, and it's something I want to lean into. And something that has been brought up recently and in the chat in part 1, which we might cut into here now, is just this more like continuing towards more authenticity, which I think is also like a pushback from the short, super stage, super clean things that are on like TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I think there's definitely a response going in the opposite direction. So I don't know. What do you guys think about just this more authentic, more side of things? I don't know if you guys saw Caleb Pike's recent video from DSLR Video Shooter, but I was like, seeing that after talking with Matthew and Caesar, I was like, wow, this is really becoming a thing. And I personally think it's for the best. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I when he came to England in the summer, I met up with him and his lovely wife and took some photographs of them in York. And we had a little bit of a chat about it then. And hearing him just be so candid and honest about his experience, like with his anxiety and stuff, is so refreshing, because on the outside, he's got a massively successful channel. And you just wouldn't think that he would have a care in the world, when the reality is it's really, really tough to stay consistent, and it's a lot of pressure for people. So I think the more conversations everyone can have about that, the better. It certainly made me feel better, because I feel overwhelmed sometimes even with my output schedule, and I'm nowhere near his level.
Yeah, I saw his video too, and I really appreciate a video like that where someone's being really honest, really open, vulnerable. Really appreciate that. I can very well imagine how he gets to that point, feeling like that. Like my channel's tiny. I mean, well, I passed 3K now, which I'm very proud of. But yeah, I can very well imagine how that goes, and I think it's very brave what he did, and I think it's good. It's good for the platform, for other creators, whether they're on YouTube or wherever else. I think it's good that people like Caleb voice their experiences and feelings.
No, for sure. And that's something that I think it's always interesting, like how being on YouTube or being even like a wedding, doing weddings, you know, you definitely have like a slightly different personality for all these different settings. And it's kind of, I'm definitely trying to be more just, you know, what I want to do what I want to do, and like be myself on these channels. And if people gravitate towards that, great. If they don't, that's fine too. Sebastian, I know you wanted to talk about Open Gate, and I was curious how often we used it earlier, correct? So yeah, I guess I'll start with Emily. You've made a video on Open Gate and how you use it, but since that video came out in 2023 and going forward, how do you incorporate Open Gate into your workflow?
So one of my goals this year is to do more vertical content on TikTok for my sins. I've not started yet. I'm trying to wrap my head around the platform. It's very confusing. And so I've started doing all of my fancier B-roll with Open Gate, with the idea that if I ever want to put it on TikTok, at least I'll have some headroom to make it make sense. But the thing I'm actually using Open Gate for most at the moment is when my husband holds a camera and films me talking to camera, he's just not great at like composing. He gives me a P head. He puts me right at the bottom. So if I stick it in 6K, I've got more chance of fixing it in post. So yeah, that's exactly
the true.
So it's
reason Lumix introduced Open Gate.
But my husband who can't compose. That's it.
It's the fixing in post feature. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, incredible. Yeah. So Sebastian, you brought up the question: how much do you find yourself using Open Gate on your GH6?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't use it very often. I don't do much vertical content. Also don't like it, to be honest. And yeah, I haven't had many requests for vertical stuff. So if I can help it, I won't use it because file sizes are also like a lot larger. But I mean, if I do get requests for vertical content, then yes, I will definitely use it because it makes life a lot easier to reframe, and especially if you want to deliver or you need to deliver in a vertical and horizontal. I mean, it's great for that, and I think it should be a standard, which Lumix has now made it a standard. I think it's great, but yeah, I personally haven't had much need for it. So that's why I was like wondering, how about you guys?
Yeah, I think personally it's only been maybe a handful of times I've really needed it or wanted it. And a few times, there's been a few times as well that I thought it would have been perfect, but the, client was not sure about it, and was like, oh, we're going to use this all over the place, social media, all this stuff. I'm like, oh, we can record it. And trying to explain it, I feel like might be the biggest hurdle of like getting a client to want that feature, because again, this would have been a perfect opportunity, I thought, but I was like, hey, can you pass this on to your editor and see if they want this or would want to do this or whatever? And I gave like even a few different options of how we could do it. And they were just like, yeah, our editor said that's too confusing. They just do regular 16:9. I'm like, well, dang it. There's that. So yeah, I find that explaining it is probably the biggest hurdle, because people are not really used to it being available, since it's until very recently, I don't think anybody but Panasonic did it. I think not Fuji and a few other cameras might, but yeah, I think it's important, but the communication side of it is the biggest hurdle for me so far. Do you have the same issue, Emily, with the crop in like that 4.4K mode, or no?
I don't mind it too much. I just sometimes wonder whether there's much benefit as opposed to just shooting the standard 16:9 if there is going to be a crop anyway. Get a little bit more headroom, but yeah, the 24p open gate is what I use the most.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I love it for anamorphic shooting as well, which is what it was intended for originally. But, yeah, I think with 16:9, you really are stuck with the 1.33 squeeze lenses. And
yeah, that's something I really want to get into anamorphic. I haven't yet, but hopefully in the future. And that's, yeah, like you said, what Open Gate is originally designed for. So then I will use it.
And, this is, I guess I know you've shot some anamorphic lenses, Emily, but I do wonder how anamorphic is going to be handled going forward with more vertical content, because if cutting like a vertical video out of 16:9 footage is difficult, cutting that out of like a 2.39:1 anamorphic is like, it just is painful. And so like I've had moments where I've approached a project, wanted to shoot anamorphic, and then had to pause and be like, am I kind of harming this project because they might want some vertical content out of this in the future, and it's going to be so wide that it's almost like the antithesis of vertical video. So I don't know. I that might be a whole conversation for someone who shoots more anamorphic stuff, but it's definitely something I have to think about when I'm choosing if it's going to be spherical or anamorphic. So I don't know if you've ever run that, Emily, or not, but I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've got the Lauer nanomorphs, and I haven't used them half as much as I should, because, as content creators, it's like fill up the screen as much as you can. And even on YouTube, when you are shooting letterbox, it makes your video a little bit smaller and less filling up people's phones, which is what we'll probably be watching on. So yeah, it does put me off. It does limit you, but I do love the effect of it. I really do.
Yeah, it's almost like back in the day when like DVDs would cut like zoom in to like widescreen movies to fill the screen, and even though you're losing like 20% of the information on the side, people would see those black bars and feel like they were getting like ripped off. So we've almost returned to that with like anything that doesn't perfectly fit like a cell phone screen is just not going to throw some people off. So that's not my favorite trend either, but you kind of just have to adapt to the current marketplace of things, I suppose. And then I guess the last thing we'll talk about is, what do you guys think your channel is going to look like in 2024? Do you have any goals you'd like to put out into the universe, or try and manifest, or whatever people say? What can people expect from you guys going into the new year and with your channels? Or do you have any personal goals or anything like that?
The one thing I really want to work on this year, and I've started with the first video that I brought out, which was about how I found a GH2 for like £27. I want to try and really up my video skills a little bit. I think I'm always perceived as like a photographer first that passably does video, when I want to try and make it a little bit more level peg. So I want to concentrate on storytelling, putting a little bit more effort into my B-roll and stuff. Like sometimes in the past I've just shot on my phone, like really just trying to make every single piece of video better. And it's taking so long, which is why it's took me this long to actually get a video out in January. I need to clone myself.
It's a wonderful video, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Took me
Yeah,
ages.
Lovely.
It was incredible. I was like,
Yeah.
man, this is like, I feel like most people will see that video and be like, this is like what I wish I was making. So I think that's a good step. And honestly, I think you're selling yourself short as a videographer quite a bit, because I think you are really talented and bring the composition and things like that photographers think about way more than videographers, and apply that to video in some pretty fun ways. And it's just a time and effort thing where it's like, I mean, I've shot B-roll on my phone too, you know, I've shot little inserts, like it is what it is. I think I've just embraced it at this point, but yeah, I think if you can, I think that video is great, and I'm super excited to see more videos like that. I love the look of the GH2, by the way. I think it's like one of the more interesting looking GH cameras for some reason. I don't know what it is.
It's pretty. It is. It's lovely. It feels really nice in the hand. Like, all I was thinking when I was using it was like, how did this come out in 2010? Like, it feels like a modern camera in so many ways.
Yeah, I've got a whole like retrospective video on some of these older Lumix cameras coming up, and I'm kind of excited about that, but it's not as specific as like going into one camera. But I've definitely thought about just buying every GH camera and just like seeing what that's like, because I started with the GH4 personally. So I guess we'll be waiting for your GH3 video, right?
I've got a GH1 video. I bought a gold Japanese edition off Buy, you know, like Japanese eBay, and it's so ugly.
You sent me a picture of this, actually.
Yeah,
I remember.
It's past customs now. It's on its way. So
it's I was wondering if you had it yet. So, oh man, well,
it's disgusting. It's gonna look so good on my shelf with all my silly colored cameras.
well, you'll have to let us know if it shoots better video for being gold. Probably couldn't hurt, right?
Yeah, I'm just concerned that the menus are actually going to be in Japanese. I'm sure I'll figure it out.
That's good luck.
Yeah.
Hey, that'll be part of the video if it is, right? So amazing. So yeah, Sebastian, what about you? Do you have any specific goals for the channel and new things you want to try, things like that?
Yeah, well, I'm relatively new to the YouTube game, and I'm still figuring it all out. And that's a lot of fun, but also there are so many choices to make. And sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed. Also about like, what should I do? What should I make? Should I say yes to this company, or should I say no? You know, is this going to do well on the channel? Although I try to stay away from that a bit. I really want to make what I want to make. But it's, I have to be honest, it's quite difficult to like sketch out like a direction or like a path from this is where my channel is going, or this is where I want my channel to go. So I'm just figuring that out, but I do have like the same goal as Emily, and focus a bit more on storytelling, because I find it particularly difficult to do that with YouTube videos. If I'm filming someone else, it's a lot easier for me to think about the story and the composition and everything. But if I'm making YouTube videos and I'm filming myself or for myself, it's somehow a lot harder. I don't know if you two have that same experience, but...
Yeah, for sure. Like with my GH2 video, I was like, oh, I could sit down and tell people about this clever little bargain that I've got. And I thought, well, why not just show them? And I tried to like turn it into sort of like a sort of short film sort of thing as a bit of an experiment. I really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I definitely find in general, it's very easy for me to like do social media content for other people, or take photos, or tell people what they should be doing. And then it's like, are you doing that? I'm like, not really. Like, do I post ever on social media? Not really. Do I, you know? So it's one of those things where it's easy to like give that advice or know what you should be doing, but implementing it, especially with like your professional work and personal stuff, all mixed into that as well. So it's definitely tricky. And every time I've tried to like plan things out or schedule like when I'm going to get all these videos done for like even like 3 or 4 weeks in advance, it just almost without fail never ends up like that. And so just like Caleb, I've just embraced breaks. You know, I'm like, oh, December is getting wild and a lot of the things are just not working. So you know what, December's getting 1 video this month, you know, and that extended almost all the way into January at this point. So, you know, while being on schedule and having that discipline to release videos consistently is nice, like also giving yourself the space to not do that if you can't, you know, I think is totally fine for that long-term sort of success. So.
Yeah, it's so true. Like February, from like, I'm going away for 3 weeks of February. I'm going to Costa Rica and I'm really excited. And all this time I've been panicking, going, oh my God, I need to make 3 extra videos in January to keep my schedule. And then like watching Caleb's video, I'm just like, will the world end if I miss a week or 2? I don't think so. You know, so yeah, it's about cutting yourself some slack. I think the biggest thing about being your own boss is you've got to cut yourself a little bit of slack sometimes.
Anyway, guys, I want to thank you guys for coming on. Definitely everybody check out these channels. They're both amazing, very different. And I think that is important, that we're not just getting like 10 versions of the same channel. We're getting everybody doing their own thing. And I think that's what I want to see more of going in 2024 from myself and everybody else. So thanks again, guys, for coming out. We'll have to do this again next year maybe, or sooner, who knows. And yeah, thanks again for coming by, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure indeed. Yeah.
And thank you guys for watching.